Hi, everybody. Welcome. My name is Bailey Saddlemeyer. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I am a double major in criminal justice studies and psychology, and I'm taking queer theories this semester along with Nicole and Dr. Pedroza. And so we are going to start with a land acknowledgement. A land acknowledgement is a principle that is a segment that is often used in restorative justice. And so we wanted to bring it into this space. So before we begin, we will acknowledge the land of Indigenous peoples. The land we are living on was colonized and taken from the Indigenous Abenaki tribes of the area. We must understand our impact on these tribes, including the Pennacook, Winnipesaukee, Pequawket, Sokoke, Kawasuk, and Ossipee, all of which have lived within New Hampshire since long before the European colonizers arrived in North America. In acknowledging the brutal taking of their land, we extend respect and an understanding of the ways in which we came to live here. Right.
I'm Nicole. My pronouns are she, her. I double major in elementary education and American studies, and I'm also taking the queer theories class this semester at Keene State. Women and gender studies programs at Keene State College have been committed to teaching the intersections of gender, race, ethnicity, class, sexuality, and difference. Women and gender studies is an interdisciplinary program in which students engage in exploration of gender studies and social justice. This program also engages students to think critically about social construction of identity and the politics of knowledge production. Students use these critical thinking skills to understand people's lives in a global context and analyze the systems of oppression that contribute to continuing economic, political, and cultural inequalities. And now I pass it to Professor Pedroza.
Thank you, Nicole and Bailey. So I have the privilege and honor today to introduce in a very brief way our wonderful guest speaker, Dr. Rita. And so Rita Urquijo-Ruiz is a Mexicana, Mexicanx, Chicanx, queer educator, writer, activist, and performer born in Sonora, Mexico, and raised in Southern California. She's a professor of Spanish, or I'm not sure all the classes that she's doing currently, but she teaches and has done Spanish classes, Chicanx, Latinx, cultural, LGBTQ studies. Her academic interests are Mexican, Chicanx, and Latinx literatures, cultures, gender, and sexuality, as well as theater and performance studies. As daughter of the Mexico-US borderlands, her approach to teaching and writing is interdisciplinary by nature, and her work centers the stories of socially and economically marginalized communities in these two bordering countries. She has become a Latina faculty, a Latinx faculty, with all degrees that we have in academia at Trinity University. Her academic and artistic work has been presented at local, national, and international conferences, such as El Mundo Zurdo by the Society for the Study of Gloria Anzaldúa, and the Mujeres Activas en Letras y Cambio Social, Women Active in Letters and Social Change, the Association for Joteria, Arts, Activism, and Scholarship, and the National Association for Chicana and Chicano Studies, NACS. At the International Conference in Chicano Literature and Latino Studies by HISPA US in Spain. At Trinity, Rita has taught courses in first year's experience, leadership about LGBTQ studies, and she is so proud to be a founder and member of many, many different programs, such as Mexico, the Americans, and Spain master program, when she co-created the first Latinx Leadership Institute. Also, she has been active influencer and creator of the Global Latinx Studies major. In 2019, Rita received the Trinity's Award for distinguished university, community, and professional service for her local and national contributions. She has mentored so many students, directed many internship programs, and so as well leading several seminars with other colleagues and other Latinx scholars. For example, New Identities in the Americans and Latinx Leadership and Empowerment. She has collaborated heavily with an iconic Chicana writer, Norma Cantu, in several events, several conferences, local, national, and internationally. And Rita also is an active member of the committee and organizing activities for El Mundo Zurdo, the left-handed world. As queer international conferences, this association of El Mundo Zurdo celebrates the work and life of Chicana queer author Gloria Anzaldúa. Rita also has served as editorial board and national advisory board of the Chicana Latina Studies, the Journal of Mujeres Activas en Letras y Cambio Social. I could go with many other presentations about Rita, but the most important is like, Rita, please know you are so welcome to King State College from our Women Gender Studies program. As Latina scholar at King State College, I honestly feel that every time that we have a Chicana scholar is a historical moment, because it's seriously not so often that we have the opportunity to listen the expertise, experience, and wonderful work of Chicanx scholars. And so I'm so grateful, Rita, that you wanted to be here with us. Welcome, and we are so excited to hear about your work.
Mil gracias. Thank you so much, and good afternoon. Thank you specifically to Nicole and Bailey for being here with us and for helping us make this program a success. And of course, the main thank you goes to Dr. Patricia Pedrosa Gonzalez, who, as a good friend and colleague, has always sought out to enlighten students and community in any place where she teaches. And so I know that people say this all the time, but do let me tell you that I am genuinely honored to be here today, and especially here for the Women and Gender Studies program at Keene College. And so I also wanted to thank Misty Kennedy for all the work behind the scenes. That these kinds of things never happen without our administrative staff and other folks that help us put this together. So thank you, Misty. I'm here in San Antonio, Texas, at Trinity University, which stands on Coahuiltecan land, Native Indigenous land that is renamed. And so I would like to acknowledge the spirits of this place that have offered me the opportunity to be here with you today. I'm going to have a PowerPoint with images and some writing, just to kind of direct your attention to what it is that I'm going to be presenting to you. I'm going to be reading and hoping I wrote it in a way that is more of a conversation rather than a strictly academic paper. I begin with an academic paragraph, but then we'll get through the personal narrative, right? Because this is very much about the next work that I'm working on. It's my personal story and who I am and how do I get here? How do I get to be the person / professor / activist that I am? And so I'll go ahead and share my screen now, knowing that I'm not going to be able to see your beautiful faces. And so please bear with me. And I believe that you'll be able to put information on the chat, right? If people have any questions and or on the Q&A later on that our students are going to help us with. And so I'm going to speak for about 30 minutes or so, 35 perhaps. Patricia, if you would be so kind to give me a times, heads up type of thing, because I do want to leave a good amount of time for a question and answer. I believe that it is in the Q&A where we get to really enjoy this type of event and get to know each other. I apologize if any of my lettering is cut off. I'm going to be reading from it just in case, but the presentation today is titled An Undocuqueer Borderland Story, Chicanx, Mexicana, Jota Memoir. And when I talk about undocuqueer, it is the combination of undocumented and queer. I am no longer undocumented, but I was when I was a teenager and a young adult. This course is Queer Theories. We're here at King State College and me here at Trinity University in San Antonio. And so let me make sure that I can go to the next stage. I dedicate this presentation to the memory of my tia Nancy, Becky Nancy Montealban del Razo, who was taken from this world 8 years ago last month for living as a trans woman. She was a sexy and sassy and hilarious 74-year-old, and you'll hear more about her later. I begin with the words of two of my favorite Chicana, Mexican-American Chicana queer authors. The first one is, of course, my all-time favorite, Dr. Gloria E. Anzaldúa. In her book, Borderlands, La Frontera, the New Mestiza, she writes, "Wild tongues can't be tamed. They can only be cut out." And Cherry Moraga, who in the first Chicana lesbian play ever published entitled Giving Up the Ghost, states, quote, "It's like making familia from scratch, each time all over again. If I must, with strangers if I must, I will." In my book, Wild Tongues, Transnational Mexican Popular Cultures, which was published in 2012, I theorize about how our intersectionality as queers of color helps us transform our communities. I state, there are many issues pertaining to Chicanx and Latinx queer identity, and the factors that enable a subject to become comfortably queer amid family, community, and institutional homophobic rejection as we face hegemonic practices of exclusivism. As Latinx queer subjects, we're often pressured to privilege one aspect of our identity, be it sexual or ethnic, over the other, and we continuously struggle to negotiate and integrate both. Therefore, a queer zone of comfort has to be created and inhabited by Chicanx and Latinx queer subjects after negotiating internalized issues and identity conflicts. As such, this must be a cultural territory where the subject is empowered by their sexual and ethnic cultural citizenship to create an ideological intervention through a politics of identity and difference. This queer zone of comfort is a safe space and a discursive location from which queers of color can decidedly contribute to the liberation of our respective communities and ourselves. In order to fully inhabit it, the subject must create familial and familiar unbreakable bonds with other members of their communities or our communities who support social change. I understand that you all read my chapter from that book, and so this was a quotation from that book. Comfortably and conscientiously queer, a personal account. Growing up, I always thought I was a genius. Don't laugh, this is true. I honestly felt that there was nothing I couldn't accomplish academically, artistically, linguistically, physically, and theatrically. I thought I was always the best. You name it, I could master it. I learned this self-confidence from my mother. May she rest in peace. Carmen Ruiz Abril Presente. We say presente in Spanish when someone has passed away and we are calling on to her spirit or their spirit. My mom was tough and hardworking, and in her personal life, no one could tell her what to do. My parents both taught me to defend and assert myself. No te dejes, chingate a quien te haga daño. Don't let them beat you, beat them back. The expected response to defend myself was physical violence. But when I was young, I was very skinny and very little for my age. So I learned early on that my best tools were my mouth, my tongue, my words. Here's a picture. I think I was about 8 or 9 years old in these two pictures. Um, in fact, words were all I had. But anytime I told anyone off, I became an hocicona, an amalcriada, a loudmouth, a nasty young woman. My maternal grandmother would ask me when I got in trouble, ¿Cuándo te vas a quedar callada? When will you remain silent when being scolded? The answer, of course, was nunca, never. But allow me to start this story at the beginning. I was born in Hermosillo, Sonora, Mexico, into a family of 12 children. If you look at the map, here is the state of Sonora, below Arizona. My home state is the second largest in Mexico and is known for its agriculture, mining, and livestock, especially beef. Our representative food is carne asada, grilled meat, and thin flour tortillas that have the diameter of a woman's arm. In the picture with my mom, she is making those famous tortillas from Sonora, and they look super, super thin, like paper thin. We can talk about that a little bit more later. So imagine the diameter being a woman's arm, right? How long is a woman's arm? That is the way that the circle of that tortilla happens. You probably have never seen something like that before. It is very traditional to that northwestern part of Mexico. So my joke is that it was tougher to come out to my family as vegetarian than as queer, because everyone at home eats carne asada, burritos all the time. I use this map because from Sonora, my travels and life have taken me throughout the 4 states in the US Southwest. And today I share with you the story of how I learned to claim these borderlands as my home. So from California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas, these have been the borderlands that I have inhabited my entire life in the US and then in Sonora in Mexico. I'm the 8th oldest or the 4th youngest in my family, depending on which group of siblings wants to claim me. My family is of very poor origins. Neither one of my parents finished elementary school, but they encouraged all of us kids to get an education. Even so, this wasn't enough, and most of my siblings didn't make it to high school. Today, only 2 of us out of 12 have a BA, and I'm the only one in my huge extended family on both sides of my mom and dad's sides with a master's and a doctoral degrees. But this journey hasn't been easy. Given our inherited poverty and the fact that my father died when I was 8 years old, my mom had to work indefatigably, meaning tirelessly, to feed 12 mouths. She struggled to accomplish this well. Nevertheless, the nourishment that I needed was of a different type. I hungered consistently to be hugged, kissed, and loved by her and my relatives in general. But there was no time and no space for this in my family. Those were cursilerias, corny things that only the rich people in the telenovelas or soap operas could afford to do. So I knew early on that at some point I would need to feed my soul elsewhere, away from my family. I would need, as Cherry Moraga tells us or encourages us to do, quote, to make familia from scratch. Ever since I can remember, I had a hard time fitting in with my birth family. I was the classic tomboy. Here's another picture of me in junior high. And it just happens to be the case that I have a Playboy t-shirt or little cutoff shirt. Well, we can talk about the images later. I was the classic tomboy who played mainly with boys, cars, wooden tops, marbles, and a broken bicycle with no pedals that my brother Lucas pieced together from found spare parts. I remember that broken toy fondly. If I ever played a las muñecas with dolls, I refused to pretend to be a mom and a comadre, or someone that baptizes your child. My sisters like to do that, but I never did. Instead, I would build elaborate houses with my father's tools and my mom's old sheets and blankets. After I nailed the sheets to some pieces of wood and to the walls outside our home, I would play at being the teacher. Surprise, surprise, I become a professor. the teacher or the sexless maestra who didn't have to have a husband or children. I hated holding a doll in my arms as much as I hated wearing dresses. Please don't get me wrong. I do not hate children. In fact, I have many nieces and nephews and grandnieces and nephews that I adore. But at that point, holding a doll in my hands was just not me. I felt that it marked me as female, and I didn't want to be marked like that. The freedom to play these games always came at a price, though. My siblings, especially my older brothers, made fun of my budding marimacha or tomboy self, and they would call me hombre sin huevos, man with no balls. This to me was the most hurtful insult. Sometimes I would cry out of anger, feeling like there was nothing I could do except defend myself by responding, ¿Y qué? So what? My child's mind couldn't help but create mental images. I never wanted to be a boy. I only wanted to have the freedom that my brothers and male friends possessed to be themselves and to be able to like girls. You're probably thinking, this is the classic lesbian story, and yes, it is, but with a few twists. Regardless of growing up in the politically conservative Mexican Northwest, queerness was close around me as a child. On my paternal side, my trans tia Nancy had already been living as a woman for a couple of decades by the time I was born in 1971. So I'll help you do the math. I will be 50 years old at the end of May. And yes, I'm a proud Taurus Gemini cusper for those of you who do zodiacs. But back to my tia Nancy. Though she was often harassed and called a joto or a fag, without a formal education, she managed to become financially independent and did not have to answer to anyone but herself. She was and remains the perfect example of a strong woman in my life. She also had an inimitable, cutting sense of humor. My tia Nancy consistently gave the metaphorical and the real middle fingers to our heteronormative, conservative Mexican society, especially when she became a queer rights activist, la reina del carnaval, and the godmother, la madrina, to the younger queers in my home state of Sonora. On my mom's side, we have these two other images. My tia Rita, I was named after her. My tia Rita introduced me to queerness. She had a bus load of amigas, friends, who would pick her up in a VW bus. A VW bus in Mexico is called a Combi, or at least in Sonora it is. And all these women, all these young women would go dancing almost every weekend. The owner of this vehicle was a cheerful, butch, masculine lesbian whose femme partner sat by her in the front passenger seat. I was a young child then, but every time I heard the purring of the Combi or the VW bus engine, I would run to my nana's or my grandma's house next door. I wanted to see this queer couple, to see all the women interacting lovingly with my very Catholic grandmother who offered them cafecito and pan dulce, coffee and sweet bread, while they were waiting for my tia Rita to finish getting ready. On their way out, my nana or grandma would make the sign of the cross over each of them, including the lesbians, as they filed into the Combi, and then she would make the sign of the cross over the Combi or the vehicle, offering the blessing so that they would return home safely. Another queer influence, unfortunately, I don't have an image of this person, was Concha la Marimacha, a stone butch woman clad in norteña clothing. So this is like a cowgirl, cowboy, cow person, jeans, cowboy shirt, boots, belt, big buckle, and a hat. Concha would walk down the main street of my barrio when I was little, and on her way to and from her mystery destination, I would always watch her. I always wondered who loved her and whom she loved. La Concha both frightened and fascinated me. I identified with her, yet I questioned if a girl would ever love me if I too became a marimacha, a butch lesbian. I kept my admiration for La Concha a secret. For many years, I was scared to admit my own queerness and despised my siblings who teased me for not fitting into the strict gender binary and sexuality norms. At 6 years old, performing the role of the childless maestra who pretended to teach numbers and letters to the barrio children, kept me safe from such harassment. School and education would eventually become my safe haven. At that time, though, kindergarten was only available to people who could pay for it in Mexico. So I had to wait until I turned 7 to attend public school. My older sisters taught me to read and write before then, and I could not wait for the first day of official instruction. But little did I know that my mom would ruin this adventure when she made me wear a sky blue dress. As I expected, I got into trouble for my tomboy ways when my teacher reprimanded me for sitting on the floor with my legs wide open, not caring about who saw my underwear, or chones, like we say in Mexico. I was used to only wearing t-shirts, shorts, or pants, so acting like a proper señorita was not an innate part of my behavior. The only thing to brighten that day and my little 7-year-old life was developing an enormous crush on Brenda, a beautiful little girl from my barrio. I was unfamiliar with these feelings, but I knew I should not share them with anyone. Since Brenda and I shared the classroom for 9 years, this crush lasted until I graduated from junior high. She remains a good friend as of now, even though she married a man and had children. At that point, I decided to migrate after junior high to the US with friends of my family, using a valid passport that would expire a month after arriving in Hawaiian Garden, Los Angeles County, California. It was 1987, and I was just turning 16. Officially, I left Mexico to attend high school, learn English, and go back to become a bilingual secretary so I could help my single mom with our living expenses. Unofficially, I left because I could not stand the bullying I was experiencing as an increasingly conspicuous queer. Along the way, I was lucky to become a member of 3 families: Mexican, my birth family, Mexican by blood; Chicanx, or Mexican American by legal guardianship on the right of this picture; and my Anglo family by an incomplete adoption process, the Porters on the left, as you're looking at this picture. This opportunity to slowly move away from my birth family began at the age of 12, when I was able to hold my first job to help pay for my junior high expenses. In Mexico, education is not free except for elementary school, so you have to pay for junior high and high school. During that summer, I would stay for weeks at a time at the house of one of my mom's friend who owned the Raspa or Raspaderia, which is a shaved ice stand where I worked. The owner's name was Mario, and he lived with his mom, his unmarried sister, and a niece. We all knew he was gay, even though he was closeted. Rumor had it that later on he died of AIDS complications in the late 1980s. My mom didn't care about Mario's gayness. He trusted him and his makeshift family. She only cared that I was staying away from home on purpose. She would call me and ask why I wouldn't come home anymore. I told her that we usually closed the raspaderia or shaved ice stand at midnight, and that it was easier to just spend the night there. Since we needed the money for my school expenses, she accepted my foolish explanation. Later on, when I was 14, another one of my mom's friends asked her to let me live with her for a while, to keep her company, to run errands, she said, because all of her children were grown and had migrated to California. Given my perfect grades and my good behavior, my mom accepted, and I managed to live in the same neighborhood, but a few houses away from mine. Finally, this same friend asked my mom to let me come to the United States to live with her son's family so that I could go to high school and learn English to help out financially. This sounded like the perfect plan, except that I would have to be undocumented for at least 3 years. Once in high school, I was placed in English as a second language, or as the Chilean playwright Guillermo Reyes calls it, English as a stressful language. I learned my new language quickly because during my junior and senior years of high school, I lived with the Porters who attempted to legally adopt me so that I could get my papers and go see my relatives in Mexico. Unfortunately, I was 17 years old by then, and the adoption process would take longer than a year. 5 different lawyers told us that the family couldn't adopt me since I would soon be an 18-year-old adult. That same year, while still in high school, I found out that California law required the state to cover college tuition and um, financial aid for undocumented students, thanks to a legal case called Leticia A. Because of this legal case, I received much support from my high school counselors. 2 of them in particular, a Mexican-American man called Mr. Eulalio Gonzalez and a white woman called Mrs. Lorraine Klebeck. They were always rooting for me to go to college. And the 2 of them worked really, really hard to get me to go to college. I was accepted eventually at the University of California, Riverside, one of the smaller campuses at that time. And it became a campus starting in the fall of 1990. This meant, however, that I would not be able to see my family for at least 4 or 5 more years. At some point, one of my older sisters managed to visit me twice, but I longed to see my mom and even my siblings who had previously bullied me. Coming to this country at such an early age and leaving all my blood relatives behind was the most difficult decision I have ever made. This was compounded by my mother's untimely death from lung cancer in 1993 at the end of my sophomore year of college. With her gone, I felt as if my world was falling apart. I was lucky enough to see her in good health only once in 1992. And here's a picture of us at the airport when I'm going to be returning back. After being undocumented, well, hold on, there's one more picture of me receiving flowers from my best elementary school friend, Irene. In Mexico, you don't receive flowers unless you're dead or there's something really, really big happening. And so it was a big deal for me to get flowers from my friend at that time, just for coming back to visit. After being undocumented for 5 years, I decided that I had learned enough English to cross the Tijuana-San Diego border without papers, pretending to be one more spring breaker who had gone to party in Mexico. Back then, there was no need for US citizens to present a passport when crossing the border, and there was certainly no one wishing to build a wall between the 2 countries. More on this later. By my second visit home, this time with a valid work permit in hand, that would allow me a legal re-entry, my mom only had 2 months to live. My third visit, unfortunately, was to go bury her. It took all the strength all the strength I had to not give up on my dreams of making my mother proud by receiving a college degree in the United States within the very prestigious University of California system. My endless search for my own home continued. It wasn't until much later that I learned that home was and is always within me. As Gloria Anzaldúa states, I am a turtle. Wherever I go, I carry home on my back. At UC Riverside, I started discovering and learning to love my Chicana and queer identities. I joined the campus chapter of a very nationalist organization called MECHA, Movimiento Estudiantil Chicano de Aztlán. Chicano movement, student movement of the US Southwest is like a rough translation for it. But unfortunately, most of MECHA's members were homophobic and very sexist. So I co-created with the help of mentors and friends, a feminist, queer-friendly student group called Mujeres Unidas, United Women or Women United, whichever way you want to translate it. I didn't leave MECHA, the nationalist organization, altogether though. Instead, when I became its co-chair, those of us who were conscientious worked to queer the organization instead of leaving it altogether. We co-sponsor visits to our campus by renowned queer writers and performers like Cherry Moraga, Monica Palacios, Luis Alfaro, and Carla Trujillo. I can give you these names later if you wanted to look them up. Carla Trujillo is the editor of one of my favorite books, Chicana Lesbians, The Girls Our Mother Warned Us About, which was published in 1991. I especially love the subtitle. Trujillo stated that no Mecha chapter had ever invited her as a queer writer to any campus because she was an out lesbian. And so she half jokingly said that she was suspicious and scared when she was invited to come to our campus. I told her that our Mecha, our campus, was different because we had queered it. Although I had the support of my peers and staff at UC Riverside, it wasn't until my junior year that I finally began to come to terms with my queerness in a long and painful process. So long that I would even pretend to, here you're looking at two images of me being in a play in a very feminine attire. Again, I can talk about that a little bit later. This was a very fun play, but you would not see me wearing that ever again unless I was in another play. Let me begin the paragraph again. Although I had the support of my peers and staff at UC Riverside, it wasn't until my junior year that I finally began to come to terms with my queerness in a long and painful process. During my closeted years, I wasn't feeling like a genius anymore because after all, geniuses were perfect and my internalized homophobia kept telling me the queers were not. I did everything I could to fit in, including becoming part of the Teatro Quinto Sol group and dressing up like this. That same year, I petitioned to attend the University of California, San Diego, which is another campus by south of California, close to the border, for 2 quarters or 1 semester. And I did this because I wanted to be openly queer away from my community at my original campus. I also wanted to scope out the Department of Literature for graduate school, and that's exactly where I become a PhD. Once there, my new city offered me the refuge I sought, and I had my first open queer relationship with Julieta. Here's a picture of us when we were dating way back then as an undergraduate, when I was an undergraduate. But when the academic year was over, I had to return to my home campus at UC Riverside and leave my girlfriend and my freedom behind. She and I made the effort to have a long distance relationship, but I told her that it did not feel safe. I did not feel safe to officially come out until I left UC Riverside. I remember one evening in particular when Guillermo Reyes, the Chilean queer playwright that I mentioned before, brought a play to campus called Men on the Verge of a Hispanic Breakdown, and it was all queer characters in the play. I understood and enjoyed every single queer joke, laughing loudly. This did not escape my non-queer friends, Lupe and Lilia, who invited me to dinner afterwards and very gently encouraged me to come out to them. We called each other my love, our mutual term of endearment, but we were literally just friends. So they began, quote, "My love, if you have anything to tell us, anything at all, please know that we love you very, very much, just the way you are," end quote. For over an hour, I kept up the pretense that I had no idea what they were talking about. But finally, their insistence and loving ways of talking with, not to me, offered a safe space. And I was able to embrace the freedom of finally being and feeling at home with these two friends and in the splendor of all my queerness. That night, we stayed up talking. The three of us stayed up talking about my first girlfriend and my gay adventures at the UC San Diego campus. However, as many of us know, the coming out process can be long and complicated, so the fights with myself were many and often. I'm convinced that it was my Mexican family and not the United States government that invented the phrase, "don't ask, don't tell," when approaching people and their queerness. My family all knew that I was queer, but no one would dare to say anything to me about this. So I had been gradually coming out to my friends and family in the US, but not in Mexico. Unfortunately, in graduate school, I found myself depressed for the loss of my mother and in an abusive queer relationship at that time that, let me read that again. Unfortunately, in graduate school, I found myself in an abusive queer relationship that almost cost me my life. This is a topic that we hardly ever talk about, so I'll be happy to answer questions about that later. And I do apologize for it, the violence of that at all, coming in at all. But this was my life, and this was important for me to point out to you. I had dramatically planned to kill myself in my Chevy Blazer on New Year's Eve, 1999, given my depressive state and suicidal thoughts. But then I thought that if I died that night, no one from my family in Hermosillo, Sonora would have known me, the real me, the queer me. I also thought about my youngest brother, Charlie, the apple of my eye, and about how my decision to leave this world would or could affect him, especially since we both had lost our mom, me at 21, him at 8 years old. The tragedies in our family have been many, and we simply did not need another one. So, after much contemplation, I called my oldest sister, Olivia, in Mexico, and slowly came out to her. She was as supportive and loving as I had hoped. Having come out to at least one member of my family meant that I had finally begun the process of coming home to myself and becoming comfortably queer, of bringing my many worlds together. This one act was life-saving for me. And of course, a lot of psychological therapy and counseling as well. Now, as a professor at a prestigious but politically conservative liberal arts university, I have many privileges, yet I continuously struggle to survive within the US Academy, which is not used to having people like me, people like us, being a part of it. My research and publications center marginalized voices. My presence in my classroom in many communities, as well as in the national and international LGBTQ AI plus stages and other academic professional organizations, is essential to surviving the current political system that is simply against everything that I and we represent. Resistance and resilience in our resistance and resilience in our fights for our humanity. We continuously struggle to show and demonstrate everyone that we are still human beings that deserve respect. I attempt in every way possible to demonstrate queerness and Mexican/Latinx pride wherever I go. But I would not be able to do my work, to be my whole self, to inhabit this queer zone of comfort as a woman of color without the encouragement of countless loved ones, friends, supporters, colleagues, and allies. Let us not kid ourselves. These are challenging and frightening times, and the previous US political administration made every attempt to erase us, to negate our centuries-old histories and stories of belonging in these lands as people of color and as queers. Now more than ever, I urge all of us to not be cynical or pessimistic, as exhausted as we might be, especially under this global pandemic, but instead to become politically involved. You can start small. You can start at your campus. You can start at your community. You can do this politically involved work anywhere. Just begin somewhere if you haven't so already. We must become uncomfortable and confront the many isms and phobias that we face in our community, in our country, and in our world. Find alliances, create loving, empowering groups that help you and others survive, but also to thrive. Surviving is no longer just the goal here. The goal is to be able to thrive. Again, Gloria Anzaldúa tells us, the US border is una herida abierta, an open wound, where the third world grates against the first and bleeds. And before a scab forms, it hemorrhages again, the lifeblood of two worlds merging to form a third country, a border culture. But then she also reminds us to quote, let us be the healing of the wound, end quote. I will close with a poem that I wrote at UC San Diego way back in 1994. I will first read it in English and then I will read its original in Spanish. Even if you don't speak Spanish, just listen for that version of it. The poem is titled Masks. Sitting in front of the mirror, I transform myself. I peel away slowly my mask of strength, my mask of braveness, my smiling mask. Starting with my forehead, I fold it downwards between my 10 fingers. I start to peel my 2 eyebrows, my closed eyelids, my nose bridge, the tip, my right cheek, and halfway, my left one, my top lip, followed by the bottom one to end with my chin. Underneath our left, a sad smirk, my face, raw, live flesh. The softest wind with the slightest touch could cut into it, exposing a thin thread of viscous liquid, pinkish, reddish, red. But every time it bleeds, there will be a new scar. And with each scar, a new face will be formed. And as new as it might be, it will learn to be strong, to have a deeply rooted true smile. I will have no more masks. I will have a new face. Máscara. Sentada frente al espejo me transformo. Desprendo milímetro a milímetro mi máscara de fuerte, mi máscara de valiente, mi máscara de sonriente. Empezando por la frente, la doblo hacia abajo entre mis 10 dedos. Se van desprendiendo las 2 cejas, los párpados cerrados, el tabique de la nariz, la punta, la mejilla derecha y a mitad de esta la izquierda, mi labio superior seguido por el otro, para terminar con la barbilla. Quedan debajo una mueca triste, mi cara bistec crudo, palpitante. Cualquier viento aterciopelado al menor contacto podría atajarla, dejando escapar un hilito de líquido viscoso, rosado, rojizo, rojo, pero con cada rasguño llega una cicatriz y de costra en costra se formará otra cara que, aunque nueva, aprenderá a ser fuerte, a expresar una sonrisa arraigada, profunda, verdadera. Quedaré con máscara, quedaré sin máscara, quedaré con más cara. Muchísimas gracias. Thank you very, very, very much. And we'll open it up to Q&A, questions and answers. I will stop sharing so I can see all of us here. Any questions? I see some things on the chat. Please type questions in the Q&A, and then I think there's a couple of questions in the Q&A.
Yes, there is. One says, at what point do you think you really embraced your queerness in your own writing?
And that's from Karen? No, that's from Kate.
And then Karen's question, I can read that after you answer or whenever.
Okay, sure. Thank you for your question. I really believe that it was a little bit of a process. I began to acknowledge my queerness first in theater and performance. So when I would be in front of the stage, and as you saw that image of me dressed up in a very feminine way, that was a play that I participated in. And so I loved dressing up and I loved messing with people's idea of my gender. I've always been very masculine presenting. And so to have dressed up in that image that I demonstrated was like, whoa, what's going on? What happened? And then the heterosexism and queer phobia, some of my friends said, oh my goodness, Rita, maybe you should dress like a woman more often. You look beautiful and this and this and that, right? And I was like, that is not me. That is my drag, dress as a girl, right? And so I believe that I came to terms with my queerness more on the stage first. And then later on at the end of my undergraduate work, when I started writing a little bit of poetry, I was able to acknowledge it in writing. When I went to graduate school, I acknowledged it fully. And I wanted to make sure that my book, although my book, Wild Tongues, Transnational Mexican Popular Culture, the majority of the material there is not queer until the end, which is the last chapter that students in this class read, the queer zone of comfort. And so when I got the job, when I was applying for the job here at Trinity University 16 years ago, I wanted to make sure that my resume or CV, we call it curriculum vitae, had everything queer that I had done, meaning that I really wanted to have the committee selecting the last top candidates, the 3 top candidates. I wanted everybody to know I was queer. I didn't want to come to a campus and be a professor if I had to be closeted. And so I upfronted everything queer that I had done. And so in a way, it's like several years, sometimes decades of coming out to different communities. At some point, I had decided that I wasn't going to come out to the Porters, my Anglo family, my white family. And that didn't happen until actually about 3 years ago, when they moved from California to Florida in their retirement. And I finally had to go, felt like I really had to go and visit. And of course, if you look at me, I fit the stereotype of a queer woman, right? And so, but it felt really good to be able to say the words to them and have them be, as I knew they would be, absolutely supportive. And so coming out is always a process, especially for some people of color that might not feel comfortable coming out in some circles. Thank you for that question.
The next question comes from Karen, and she said, "Thank you so much. I love that you emphasized finding alliances. We often feel that we have to do everything alone, especially in the US. What advice do you have for young students to find and develop their communities of activism?"
That's an excellent question as well. Thank you. I honestly believe that I wouldn't have survived my life and the challenges that I was facing if it had not been for all those people, especially my good friends in college as an undergraduate. In high school, I was completely closeted. I did not feel safe to come out at all. And so as students, I feel that it's really important to reach out as much as you can to other students. If there are any organizations on your campus that are supportive of BIPOC lives and stories, as well as queer LGBTQ stories, join them. Even if you don't identify with those groups, if there aren't any, come and talk to your professors, such as Dr. Patricia Pedrosa here, who could be your faculty sponsor, right? At Trinity, we need faculty sponsors to begin a college group, a student organization. And so be brave to create your own space, right? Be brave to go and look for people that are like-minded with you. And once you feel comfortable and strong in your ideas, reach out to others that might not, right? I am asking for us to be uncomfortable once we are centered on our own identity, in our own identity. So for me, as you heard from my story, I had to create my own organization that was able to create a space for me to exist with all of my intersectionality. I couldn't just be one thing or the other, right? And so also sometimes you can reach out, you can do these kinds of activisms online. Many of you are connected to social media. So if there isn't something in your college campus or in your community that supports you in all your splendor of who you are, there might be a way to create a community through social media. That's a little tricky sometimes, but the idea is to always reach out to someone that can be an ally. And an ally doesn't have to be like us, right? An ally doesn't have to look like us. An ally doesn't have to speak the same languages that we speak. An ally is a person that can open their heart up to you and be able to welcome you with your intersectionality, and a place where you feel comfortable, where you can lay your guard down and breathe and just relax and be able to exist in who you are.
The next question comes from Victoria, and she says, "What would you tell undocumented people during this time, the youth and those starting their careers and older people?" And Angelica said, "Thank you so much for sharing your story, Rita. I love you."
Oh, thank you so much. Love right back to you. I was very lucky to be a part of the Kickstart, the organization that we started called Dream Lead Institute. And this was a group of us here at Trinity, Dr. Juan Sepulveda, and we were working with the Hispanic Heritage Foundation, the National Foundation in DC. And we decided to create a group for undocumented young adults. So it wasn't just for undergraduate students, but people from 18 to 35 years old. And we felt that many of them didn't have the support that some of the undocumented folks that are in college or in high school had. So the idea was, where do these undocumented folks go after they graduate, or if they haven't been part of a college career? And so in that Dream Lead Institute that we created at the national level, we had undocumented folks from all over the world, not just Latinas and Latinos and Latinx, but people of Asian and African descent, as well as Latin American descent, right? And so look for these places. Go to the different organizations nationally that have the support for undocumented folk in general, and also for undocumented and queer folk in particular. In terms of students, there remains, depending on which state in the nation you live in, there remain some laws in effect that can protect and or help students with scholarships. Sometimes it's a state-funded scholarship fund, or there might be a law in the books that allows students to go to college and have some of the state financial aid, which is what I did way back in the 90s. And please reach out to me after this presentation and this class is done today. I don't go away, right? Anytime I'm invited into a space, I like to extend myself and my time. As busy as all of us are, I really feel that, especially during these pandemic times and difficult emotional times that we are having, reach out to me. Try not to be too intimidated. I'm just one more person, right? I happen to have degrees and to have published books and that, but honestly, nothing makes me happier than to have someone reach out to me out of the blue and say, hey, I met you at this place and I have this question for you. Could you help me? And I promise you that if I don't know the answer, I will make it up. Just kidding. If I don't know the answer, I will reach out to someone that does. As you can tell, I practice humor. I write about humor in my books. But reach out. Just if someone can put my email on the chat, or maybe I can do it. Let's see if I do it fast enough. R Urquijo, the first part of my last name, at trinity.edu. That's for you all in the chat to keep. And I'm just an email away, right? And the idea that I have a lot of resources that I can share with people that are undocumented at different ages. I won't be able to detail all of them here, but do know that they exist. And the fact that I was undocumented before keeps me in touch with different organizations across the United States, not just in Texas or in California or in New York or in the East Coast. But depending on where you live and who you are and what your resources are, I can also connect you with some community organizations as well. And so I'll be happy to do so. Just reach out.
The next question comes from Lauren and Katie, and they ask, do you feel more comfortable expressing your queerness in a particular country, or is it more about the different environments that you find yourself in within different communities?
That's a wonderful question. I travel while queer, right? So that means that I'm always visibly queer, especially at airports. And so this whole, you have randomly been selected for a second revision. It's never random with me. I always know that because of the way I look, I will be profiled. But I still hold on to that identity that to me is soft butch. I look masculine, but I can dress up in a soft masculine way. Sometimes I will wear bow ties. If you've seen any pictures of me in other places, I probably am wearing a bow tie. And so to me, when I was a graduate student at UC San Diego in California, Southern California, I decided to take a self-defense class because I would travel internationally to Mexico or sometimes to Spain. And if I weren't in my home state, in my city, in my community, I would feel uncomfortable. I'm still not gonna let my hair grow, and I'm still not gonna stop wearing what I wear in terms of my shoes and my shirts, my button-down shirts and all that. But I felt that I needed to take a self-defense class in order to have those tools in my tool bag. Thankfully, I have never had to use them. I have never had to physically defend myself because I have a lot of privilege, and I have to acknowledge that I am around in circles that are middle to upper middle class. When I travel with friends and colleagues, and so I will not often find myself in situations where it's going to be a very dangerous place. If I have to, then I'm gonna have to be able to be careful and be able to use my self-defense knowledge. So I feel the safest. I think it's because I grew up there. My barrio in my little neighborhood in the state where I was born, in the city where I was born, I'm proud of this because it's a very poor neighborhood, so poor that the police cars do not enter my neighborhood. If they dare enter my neighborhood, they throw stones at the police cars and they destroy property. And the reason why I'm proud of that is because the police in my home state, in my city, is also very repressive, like it is here in the United States. And so sometimes the police do not serve and protect my community. So my community is not comfortable having the police come into our barrios. And so because I was born and raised there, I feel very safe, even though it's not safe for other people. I feel safe because people that know me will protect me and take care of me when I am in the most dangerous areas of my city. And so I think that it's important for me to acknowledge that because I have a passport, because I can travel by plane, because I am not necessarily, when I'm traveling internationally or even nationally, I am not on the ground as much as other people are, right? But this doesn't mean that these places are not dangerous. This doesn't mean that the numbers are not horrific when it comes to queer and especially trans folk that have been murdered across the nation all the way around. So the more masculine I look, the more careful I have to be. Especially with the haircut like this, right? Where it's like, oh, I get called sir all the time, and I'll answer as long as it's with respect. If someone is directing themselves to me with respect, I don't put up a fight with the pronouns, as long as it is in a respectful manner. And then later on, they'll learn that my pronouns are she and her, hers, and so. I always encourage everyone to be as safe as possible and to not put themselves in dangerous situations if they can help it. And if they cannot help it, to have their community with them as much as they can.
And I think we have time for a few more questions. Is that right, Professor? Yeah, okay. So Patrice asked, I love how you described that as a child you longed to be hugged and kissed and loved by your mom, but that there was no time for this in the family, and that you felt that you would need to feed your soul away from your family. I felt that way growing up too. I grew up in the South, and my mom coming out was hard for me. I wonder if you felt a kind of alienation that took you away from yourself.
I sincerely did feel that way because I felt that I was too sensitive, quote unquote, for my family. I feel that I'm perfect the way I am and the way I was, but in my family, there was no space for sensitivity, right? There was no space for what my mom called chillonas, crybabies. We needed to be tough, and we needed to be always ready to fight and always ready to defend ourselves. And it was like a battlefield, like a battleground. And so the idea of my poor little soul not feeling at ease, not feeling comfortable at home, notice that in what I read, I say I started leaving as soon as I could, which was 12 years old. Where were you when you were 12 years old? What were you doing when you were 12 years old, right? Do you remember yourself at 12 and what your situation at home was? Hopefully many of you had a loving family, a loving home. I didn't. And so I did everything I could within reason to escape my home. But I didn't want to escape my mom, right? I didn't want to escape my siblings. I just felt like I had to escape everything altogether. And so in a way, it was like, my hope was that I could escape to come back later, to come back stronger, to come back in a way that I could be more sure of myself. Unfortunately, my mom dies when I'm really young, right? And so the idea of returning home, if you don't have a mom and you don't have a dad, home is really nebulous. It's kind of like, where do you land if your parents are not there, right? Or if your caretakers are not there. And so in that sense, my escapism beginning that young, that early, served a purpose. But I was always a scaredy cat. I was a kid that, because of my sensibility and sensitivity, I never wanted to be too radical or too rebellious. I wanted to be rebellious, but in a self-protective way. And so I wouldn't get myself in trouble in a way that I would land in unsafe spaces. So what's the safest way to escape for me as a nerdy queer kid is school. It really is all about school. So school becomes that safety net, that the refuge, that the resource where my teachers loved me because I was the top of my class, and I was always helpful. But really I was just looking for protection, right? So when I leave home in Mexico to come to the US, it was with the pretense of school. I just wanted to go learn English and come back and then help. But more than learning English, it was about running away from home in a safe way. No one was gonna let me run away from home if I wasn't studying. They knew that if I wasn't studying, I was gonna get in trouble. And my parents were always, my mom and my grandma, my maternal grandmother, were always afraid of us landing in jail, which some of my siblings did land themselves in jail, especially the boys. So I wanted to be smart about my running away. I wanted to be smart and go through the educational route. And that's really what saves me. That really is what saves me. So now as a professor, I try to create those very safe environments for other students like me when I was young, right? It's like, I want to be the source of peace, that source of welcoming, that source of safety, creating a safety net for all my students, regardless of their race or ethnicity or economic background. Is always one of my top goals. Who can I work with? Who can I mentor? How can I be close to any of my students that are struggling, be it mentally, physically, academically? It's very much about giving back what I got from my teachers and my professors. I want to be back, to get back there and be able to be a resource like many people were for me.
The next question comes from Drew, and she asks, do you believe that the COVID-19 pandemic has made the queer community more vulnerable? If so, how?
We see it here at our campus that some of our queer students might not have a safe home. Just all the topics that we're talking about here, right? The pandemic has trapped some of our queer folks at home when home is not safe. And so unfortunately, that is happening, that is going on. And sometimes it's not even about being queer. It could be a home that is not safe for anyone, right? It could be a home where there is physical violence or intrafamily violence, or where there is food insecurity or any other insecurity that there might be there. And so that pandemic has unfortunately trapped many of us in places that are not safe. And so again, here in San Antonio and at my campus, we're working really hard to create alternative spaces, right? Other communities where we can have our students come back to campus, live in a dormitory, and be able to be away from the families that torture them, the families that don't welcome them, the families that might not even be at fault. They might not even be doing this willingly, but that perhaps they themselves don't have the resources to survive this pandemic. This pandemic has been atrocious on communities of color and poor communities across the world, not just us here. And so when we are under pressure, economically or in any other kind of pressure, unfortunately, violence rises, right? The percentages of violent homes has risen internationally. If you have been watching the news, violence is international. In terms of queers in particular, yes, it is very dangerous under this situation now. And so now more than ever, we have to continue to reach out to our own makeshift families, right? To our own safety nets. And to try as hard as we can. Depression is real and depression is debilitating. I was listening to a podcast that says the opposite of depression is action. And so, or at least one of the opposites of depression is action. So how can you make yourself act in a way to reach out, right? Who do you reach out to? What are your resources? How do you seek the help that you need? Because the help is out there, right? And there, especially if you're in a college environment, there are many people that are vouching for you, many people that want to help you. how do you make yourself reach out to those people that will literally save your lives?
So, Nicole, I don't know if you can read, I think that there are 3 questions that maybe if you read to Rita together, and I think that she can compile.
Okay.
We will leave like other 10, 15 minutes. In this case, Misty is full the whole evening. She has many events. And so as we are here, but I'm aware of the time. So
how much time do we have?
Other 15 minutes.
15?
I think that there are 3 comments, questions more, and maybe Nicole can read them. And I think that they are, the answer can overlap your comments.
Okay, so the first part of the question is, hi Rita, I wanted to say thank you for being our guest speaker today. Your story and work is very inspiring and eye-opening for me. I wanted to ask for your advice as someone who has queer friends. If there are any ways you can think of that may help support and make them feel more comfortable with their queerness. And then the next part says, this was a wonderful talk. Thank you. Your story is inspiring and I appreciate your vulnerability and sharing so much with us. Thank you. And the last part says, I want to ask if religion / spiritualism play a role in your life / coming out story. Thanks in advance.
Thank you so much. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to address everything, but let me begin with the spirituality / religion question, since that's the one that is freshest in my mind. My grandmother on my maternal side was Catholic and very much Catholic, passionate. But thankfully, as I said in my story, when confronted with queerness, I never heard anything homophobic coming out of her mouth. And so I think that because my tia Rita, my mom had 2 daughters. I'm sorry, my maternal grandmother had 2 daughters, my mom and my tia Rita, and five sons. So my tia Rita and my mom were the only girls at home, and my grandma always wanted to be protective of them, but also in her own way, loving. So when my tia Rita would bring the bus load in the VW bus load, about like 12 or sometimes 15 young women, and the driver and the people and the woman in the front were a lesbian couple, visibly lesbian couple. I loved it that in spite of religion, my grandmother was more supportive of her daughter and her friends than of religion. So in that sense, she never used religion against queerness. She never used, we also with my tia Nancy being trans, when my tia Nancy is on my paternal side, but when she would visit my maternal grandmother, she would welcome her, my tia Nancy, with open arms. So in a way, I grew up with wonderful role models of religious people that were open-minded and welcoming. Let me put it that way. My dad died when I was 8.5. And so what I remember of my dad was that he was agnostic, meaning that he believed in a higher power and a higher being, God, he would say God, but he didn't believe in institutionalized religion. So growing up, my father always said, you do not need to go to a church to heal your soul and to help you connect with God. He said, God is everywhere. And when I go to the hills of our barrio and go and collect cactus fruit, I speak to God there. I speak to God when I'm showering. I speak to God when I'm walking to work. I speak to God at any point. So he would tell us, and I remember this clearly as little as I was, you have a direct line and a direct connection with God. Don't allow anyone ever to make you feel guilty about organized religion. Organized religion is one thing, and spirituality is another. And so for me, it has been a very spiritual journey to be able to be who I am and accept the idea of being open to spirituality and to religions, and to respect religion across the world, but not when it's used for oppressive purposes. So in that sense, I welcome religion in my life and in other people's lives, as long as it's used for good and for empowerment. Nicole, would you mind reminding me of the other question?
I can do that. It says, I want to ask for your advice as someone who has queer friends, if there are any ways you can think of that may help support and make them feel comfortable with their queerness.
As I mentioned, again, my friends Lupe and Lilia, were so wonderful, even though they're straight themselves, right? They loved me and they loved me as a friend. And so for them, they wanted me to be very comfortable. And so I think that regardless of how anyone identifies in terms of queerness, you can be a good resource to anyone, to your queer friends, to your non-queer friends, as long as you're being honest and open-hearted with them. And so care about the person, right? And then ask them about their queerness. Tell them, make them feel comfortable so that they can tell you what they need themselves. Don't make assumptions, right? We can make many assumptions. And so notice that I'm skirting the issue here because I don't know who your friends are, right? But I do know that a smile and an open heart, and when it's safe to do so, a hug can carry you away so much further than anything else in the world. A smile is universal, an open heart is universal, and a hug is universal, right? And so be there with people and do what we call hold space, right? Hold space for them. Allow them to be themselves, allow them to fall apart in front of you without feeling guilty, allow them to sing and dance with you, allow them to bring music into your heart and into your life. Share the good things, right? Share the good things, but also be present when the tough times are there. And I think that there's this thing that happens when you ask people for favors, that you are in their debt or they are in your debt. Doing favors for people is a wonderful thing because that connects you, that calls you back. And building community begins with, I think, in a really cheesy way, building community begins with a smile and an open heart. And so can you be genuine? Can you find the strength in these very challenging times to reach out to anyone that might need you? And to just begin by asking them, how are they, right? How are you today? In some indigenous cultures, we ask, how is your heart today? ¿Cómo está tu corazón, right? How is your heart today? Not how are you? Oh, I'm fine, thanks, everything's good, bye, right? But how are you feeling? What is troubling you? What can I help you with? Would you like to listen to this really cool song that I heard this morning? And how do you connect? Basically, how do you connect with people?
And I think those were all the questions.
Wonderful. Well, thank you also very much for being here. It really is an honor when we get to have your undivided attention. And as professors, we love the stage. And so this is very nice to be able to share the personal side of me, since you already read the academic version of me. My hope is to continue to write this memoir and put it out there so that if there are any other young people that might need to see themselves in it. And the idea is that my challenge is to write it in a way that it becomes universal, so that regardless of your ethnicity and any other kind of background, that you can identify with these issues that are here, right?
Great. But and so tell us, at what stage are you in the book, Rita?
Hi, Patricia.
Keep going the homework. We need to do the homework.
Unfortunately, I'm not very advanced in the stage of my writing of my...
Okay, because we want to bring you back to present the book.
That would be fabulous. That would be
yes, I'm telling you.
That would be a dream come true.
I will continue watching you.
Thank you.
No, how many paragraphs? I will ask. Next question will be, hi Rita, ¿cómo está tu corazón, mi amor? ¿Cuántos párrafos escribiste este mes?
Right, and I'll say I wrote about 3 paragraphs in a month.
3 paragraphs in a month.
I said that I would get back to my writing when I became a tenured professor. For the students that don't know, you are an assistant professor. 5 or 6 years later, you become tenure and you have a permanent job. It didn't happen. And then I was like, okay, I'll write it when I become a full professor.
And now you are.
And now I am, and it's like, okay, there's no excuse anymore.
No excuse anymore, Rita.
So in the spring of 2022, as soon as December 15 ends the fall semester, I have 8 months to finalize my memoir. So my really big hope is to publish it by 2022.
I'm checking, I'm putting on the calendar.
Oh, that's scary.
No, that's also the other kind of support that we need to give our friends, like students. Please know, doing papers, writing is hard work. So we need community with that too. we can celebrate together, but we can cry together, and we can say, I hate so much this paragraph, I cannot finish. And so bringing community to that also is very important.
Community, I really believe that community is everything. And community can be your own family, or it could be the family that your chosen family, right? The people that you choose to live with and to connect with. Nothing is ever accomplished by ourselves with one person singularly. And so reach out to your loved ones. Even if you haven't talked to them in a while, reach out to them. If they love you, they'll be there for you, no matter what.
Well, thank you so much, Rita. Before, we're still having a lot of participants. Thank you so much for being here. As organizer of this event, I forgot to say that we have the presence of Rita thanks to a wonderful grant award from Fidelity to Women Gender Studies, and that is very important to say. So if somebody here can tell the grants office that I really said the sponsorship of this wonderful presentation today, thank you so much for Fidelity to provide help with the logisticals for this presentation. And absolutely, Misty, as always, thank you so much. I don't know how you manage all the events for us at King State College. Thank you so much to you and to your office. And obviously, thank you so much to Nicole and Bailey that are here. This is part of the community. I strongly believe in faculty-student collaboration, and that is wonderful to do. We are together in the same work. Obviously, all the students in my queer theory, they know how much I admire and respect, and I'm so honored to be the instructor this semester for them. And everybody here, I really, really appreciate your presence. Keep in touch with Women Gender Studies if you are interested in classes. Everybody that knows me know that I say everybody that we need the support for this kind of awareness, this kind of conversations. I love schools. I love all our education. However, in Women Gender Studies, the commitments that we have to cover gaps, to engage all the intersectional approaches in the arts, in the theories, in the communities, in the personal stories of individuals, it's particularly important, and it's all the time at the center. In that sense, we are different and we are wonderful. And as you know, the commitment to balance all theories, studying processes with activism also is different in the kind of fields that we are. And in this case, I'm privileged that we're still being connected. Rita, feliz de tenerte, y no será la primera vez y nos seguiremos cruzando, obviamente, en las asociaciones donde nos cruzamos. Dale un abrazo a todo el mundo en San Antonio.
Un abrazo para ustedes. Thank you so much, Bailey and Nicole, for joining us here and helping us make this possible again. And so anyone that was listening today, again, you have my email there, rurquijo@trinity.edu. If you need anything at all, do not hesitate. I am a busy person, but I'm never busy to do matters of the heart. And so let me know how I can help, even if it's just, telling me a story or wanting to share something, or if you need resources on anything that I covered, I'll be happy to do so even after today.
Okay. So, no te me vayas, Rita, un minutito para la logística de qué sigue.
Está bien, sí. I'll stay here.
Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful afternoon, evening. Take care.